another speaker to introduce. So our next speaker is going to be Kerry, who is the vice chair of the Travis County Democratic Party. Kerry's life is animated by his quest to create a community where all people can work, play, learn, and live to their full potential. And he spent years strengthening people's commitment to environmental stewardship, healing the racial divide, addressing the root causes of poverty, and fighting for the full inclusion of LGBTQIA+ people. Now, in the Travis County Democratic Party, Kerry wears several hats, many hats. He serves as the TCDP vice chair. He's the chair of the Far Northwest Progressive Super Precinct, and he's the precinct chair for his own precinct on the west side of Leander. And in addition, he co-leads a local Williamson-Travis County coalition of precinct chairs that are focused on electing Democrats to the Leander City Council and the Leander ISD Board of Trustees. And our club recently endorsed Kerry in his bid to become a Congressional District 10 delegate to the upcoming Democratic National Committee convention in Chicago. And last week at the state convention, he was duly elected. Please welcome Kerry Stevens.
All right, thank you very much. I just love applause before I even say anything. So good afternoon. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you for inviting me here today, and thank you very much for your endorsement. As he pointed out, I was able to win that election. I'm going to be going to Chicago in August, and I promise to do my very best not to embarrass you, since you endorsed me. And before I get started, Linda, I just want to tell you I'm going to run overtime by a couple of minutes. I apologize ahead of time.
I'll let you know when you run to 10, so then you have 2 more minutes.
Okay, so thank you. I'll just talk faster, I guess. So I'd like to start by inviting you to join me in saying out loud some prose that you probably recognize. Okay, so feel free to jump right in. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And to secure those rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. So thank you all very much. Give yourselves a round of applause. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the definition of democracy, and more specifically, a democratic republic. And of course, that came from the Declaration of Independence, right, in 1776. So, court, on the surface, saving democracy might seem like an odd topic. The first question that comes to mind is, why do we have to save democracy? Isn't it baked into our Constitution? Isn't it part of the DNA of our country? Don't we all love democracy?
No, not everyone. Not everyone.
Right. And it might feel that way, but in a recent Texas Lyceum poll, you may have seen this, the results just came out a week ago, only 37% of the Texans polled strongly agreed of the idea that democracy is the best form of government. 37% of those polled. So the truth is that our democracy is fragile, and it always has been. However, we, the people, have the power to do something about that. And I'm going to share with you in a few minutes what some of those things are. But first, I think it's valuable to look back in our history to see where we're coming from, so we have a better idea about where we are going to. So after years of debate in some of the constitutional conventions at our country's birth, our leaders, of course, were not of one mind. We all know that. We probably learned this when we studied U.S. history. So they wrestled with the structure of government and the roles of the federal government versus the state governments. And even after settling on the Constitution, they still had to come back around and make some amendments, of which the first 10 are called the Bill of Rights. And so nothing had ever been tried like this before. And for many people, it was even being viewed as an experiment. And so in a speech during a Constitutional Convention debate, Patrick Henry stated, and I quote, "Who knows the dangers that this new system may produce? They were out of sight. They are out of sight of the common people. They cannot foresee latent consequences. I dread the operation of it on the middle and lower classes of people." It is for them, I fear, the adoption of this system. Your president may easily become your king. Your Senate is so imperfectly constructed that your dearest rights may be sacrificed to what may be a small minority. End quote. There's also a story that probably many of you have heard of, that upon exiting the Constitutional Convention, Benjamin Franklin was approached by a group of citizens and asking what sort of government the delegates had created. Do you remember his answer? A republic, if you can keep it. So what did he mean by that part? If you can keep it. You see, the Constitution is neither a self-actuating nor self-correcting document. It requires the constant attention and devotion of its citizens, we, the people. From the outset, our former government was flawed. It allowed slavery. It forbade women the right to vote. It allowed the continued oppression of freed African Americans. Over time, those issues were addressed, but today we still experience flaws up and down the ballot, if you will. Let's look at the presidency. Article 2 of the Constitution describes the presidency in just a handful of paragraphs. To a remarkable extent, our presidency is shaped by unwritten traditions and expectations that historians and political scientists have called norms or soft guardrails. Former President Trump busted one of those norms after another, revealing the extent on which the entire system was built on the basic assumption that our president would stay within some range of reasonableness. Could Trump steer taxpayer money to businesses? Could he call for the investigation of his political rivals? Could he fire people in oversight positions and replace them with loyalists? Yes, he could, and yes, he did. What prevented past presidents from such behavior? Only those presidential norms. And it turns out that shamelessness is really empowering. But the disease of breaking norms has infected more than the presidency as well. Our Senate Majority Leader at that time, Mitch McConnell, refused to entertain the appointment of Merrick Garland to the Supreme Court in 2016, shamelessly citing that Obama had less than 1 year left in his term and therefore did not deserve to appoint a justice. And in Texas, Governor Greg Abbott recently issued a full pardon to the convicted killer of Garrett Foster, a Black Lives Matter protester, making a mockery of our justice system. And just last month, the 2024 Republican Texas Party platform called for yet another swipe at our voting rights, requiring winners of statewide races to also win a majority of the 254 counties in Texas, most of which, of course, are red. Right, deeply red. And so you can easily see where this is going. Sadly, I submit that we are moving towards an authoritarian form of government. An authoritarian government has a concentration of power in the hands of a small group of people who act in ways that are not constitutionally accountable to the people they are meant to represent and serve. So here are a few attributes of authoritarianism pulled from the Commons Social Change Library. 1, rejecting democratic rules of the game or norms. 2, spreading lies and conspiracies to undermine the public's belief in truth. 3, gutting or demonizing institutions to undermine the public's trust in those actors that are typically holding the state accountable. 4, blaming minorities, immigrants, and outsiders for a country's problems, promising to restore national glory. 5, rewarding loyalists and punishing defectors. And lastly, encouraging or condoning violence to advance political goals. Does any of this sound familiar? Yes. The good news is there is power in the people, we the people. And what I'd like to look now is at 2 historical examples where we the people have made significant progress. So Teresa mentioned the women's right to vote earlier. I would ask you, what year did the women in the United States get the right to vote? 1920. So what preceded that milestone was a lengthy and difficult struggle, as many of you probably know. It began as a local movement. Did you hear that part? A local movement think about your slides, it began as a local movement. Several generations of women suffragettes lectured, wrote, marched, lobbied, and practiced civil disobedience. There were numerous state campaigns, court battles, and petitions to Congress. What many thought was impossible ultimately led to the ratification of the 19th Amendment. Second example, let's look at how Poland escaped its authoritarian rule. Now, Poland has a complicated history. If any of you have studied the Polish history, it has a very complicated history. After World War I, though, it became a democratic republic. But in the wake of World War II, just a short time later, it came under the rule of the Soviet communist regime. And then subsequently, with rising prices in the 1970s, mass protests broke out across the country. And workers began to strike. And they were being organized by what was called the Solidarity Independent Self-Governing Trade Union. And finally, after more than a decade of these strikes, plus other organized resistance, the authorities agreed to a democratic election. And this Solidarity Trade Union turned party won in a landslide, abolishing the former authoritarian rule. Some of you remember that. Right, maybe all of us remember that, yes. Now, do you see a common theme in these two examples? I see an organized effort. I see a group of people collaborating to achieve a common goal, committed to doing the hard work over time. That's how social change happens. That's how it's happened in the past, and that's what has to happen again to ensure that we retain the democracy that we hold today. You see, there's power in the people. So, what can we do? So what can we do to push back against this authoritarianism today? I'm going to share 4 steps with you, again, that are adapted from the Commons Social Change Library. First is to identify the issues. And there are many to choose from. We've got voters' rights, for example, gerrymandering, the lack of civics education in schools, campaign finance, the list goes on. Choose an issue that you feel most passionate about, because passion fuels longevity. And longevity is the backbone of success in any of these efforts. Second, form diverse coalitions or movements who have a shared vision and clear, concrete goals. Authoritarianism thrives on division and disorientation and a rhetoric of us versus them. So the more diverse your coalition, the stronger you can become. And so consider engaging members of the pillars of the community, as we might think of them, like religious institutions, business groups, unions, professional associations, media institutions, and security forces in your pro-democracy union. And I might add, of course, the parties. Listen to each other and communicate across those differences so that you become most effective. And third, I'm going to emphasize this is the most important step in the process, you got to do the hard work. You got to do the hard work. So mount persuasion campaigns like letter writing, testifying, or public speaking towards those people in power. Launch legal challenges if you must. Raise public awareness to apply additional pressure through a range of nonviolent tactics that have been practiced over the years, such as protests, rallies, and boycotts. Do what authoritarians don't expect or want. And remember that small seeds can become big trees. Remember that change seldom happens overnight, but change does happen. Just a couple of years ago, a local group of moms here started a group called Moms Against Greg Abbott. Very good. And today, that's a statewide organization, just 2 or 3 years later, with $1.5 million in donations. They've got a future. Lastly, in my 4 steps, you've got to vote.
Kerry, do people know how it started?
Well, we can talk about that later during questions and answers, if that's okay.
It's part of your talk right there.
So lastly, you've got to vote, right? You've got to get your community to vote. And you've got to vote for the people like Teresa and Dwayne who are willing to fight for democracy, from our school boards up to our governor's mansion. Vote for these change makers. And in Texas, as we've already heard, we have enough potential Democratic voters today to turn this state blue. Our challenge is getting them out to vote. The challenge is convincing them that change is possible. Now, we know that change is possible. The North Shores Dems Club and Super Precinct, thanks to Marie and the other precinct chairs and Mike and all the members of this club, they are doing just that. Through voter registration, through door knocking, texting, and calling one person at a time. As you have seen on the slides that Jack shared moments ago, the North Shore Dems are making a difference in Lago Vista and beyond. They are getting out to vote. And for that, I thank you, and I thank you. Now, if you're not engaged today in my closing comments, I invite you to get involved. At times, I'm going to tell you, the work will not be easy. But I cannot think of a better legacy to leave your family than to say, I helped turn Texas blue. There's power in the people. Thank you very much.